In a project, it's about moving code around, moving files to servers, working with a database. It's meant to be somewhat of a technical talk, but I can business it up if I need to. So I'm kind of interested in the audience that I'm speaking with. So who here works in a team, okay, in a coding environment, actively participating in code, okay, and you're actually interested in this kind of topic? Okay. Who works with Git? Let's get some honest answers here. Okay. Who wants to know more about Git? Okay. So I guess what I'm hoping to get out of this presentation is at least if you don't completely understand what I'm talking about, then maybe it'll at least get you turning a little bit. So walk home with something, at least maybe some resources to go home with, etc. My name is Josh Shashaty. I work at the WP Valet. And we do support and all these awesome things, but we also do custom development and design. And about a year ago, I was asked to join up on that team and lead the code side of it. So my role is to make sure that projects are organized, they're clean, they're performant, and structured well for the most part. About 2 years ago, I started down on this path about, I was a freelancer just 2 years ago. And I knew what version control was, but I didn't take, that plunge just yet. I feel like a lot of people in the WordPress community specifically really kind of avoid that. There's a lot of cowboy coders. Does everybody know what cowboy coding is? It's like changing files on the server, right? And just yeehaw, let's see what happens. That's basically what cowboy coding is. And I was largely that, and honestly, that's a good way to learn, right? Just go in there, break stuff, and see what happens. That's a great way to learn. But eventually, if you want to join a team, you want to make yourself marketable, make yourself valuable, you got to know how to work in a situation where you need version control. You got to have responsible deployments. You got to work with a database with multiple environments. So I was obsessed with this topic. Because I wanted to be part of a bigger team, and I wanted to make sure that if we brought on bigger projects or we brought on people to our team, that people can join our team easily, we could scale well with the size of the project that we have, and there wouldn't be any hiccups. Obviously, there's always hiccups along the way, but I wanted to minimize those hiccups, right? So this is my opinion. There's so many different ways that you can do this. So again, my point is just to get you an idea of what I'm doing. We could talk about it, create discussion. So what we're basically going to be covering today is version control, deployments, and handling database and WordPress environments. Okay. All right. So for us, here are some of the challenges. Right? We have different server environments. So that means shared hosting. People have their own dedicated environments. We don't always have control over the configuration files on people's servers. If you work on a WP Engine environment, which we do a lot, we work a lot with WP Engine, we don't have control of what's really going on underneath. And that can really dictate how you're pushing files to your server, what's running, and really your overall flow. So we need to be flexible enough to handle shared hosting if they're on SiteGround, they're on, God forbid, GoDaddy, or those things, type of things. We need to make sure that if we hire out, because that's a very possibility, if there's a skill that we don't necessarily have just yet, but we need to hire out, that person needs to be able to come onto our team and do it quickly, and we need to on-ramp those people, right? Or if we're hiring somebody new, I don't want to have a whole complicated process that they can't come on quickly with, all right? And the last challenge is staying simple, right? Everybody has different styles, they have a certain workflow they want to follow. I need to be simple and flexible enough for them to come onto that. So some of our goals, I've already talked about that a little bit. On-ramp contractors pretty quickly. Our version control must work hand in hand with our deployments. And what I mean by deployments is I'm working locally, I have files on my computer, I need to shoot those up to the remote server, which is where the website lives, right? So deployments need to work hand in hand with my version control. When I commit code to my repo and I want it to deploy at some point, then that needs to work hand in hand. Work locally, we see you cowboys. And we also want to deploy often to a remote environment. So it's responsible to code locally, right? But at the same time, you need to show your work to the client that you're working with, right? That's important for you guys too, right? So that's for us too. We need to kind of show them progress that, while we should be coding locally, we still want to be able to show off our work in an environment that's not really shown to the public just yet, but they need to be able to see it. We need to maintain a staging area for testing new features, or if something goes wrong on the production server, like a bug, we got to be able to test somewhere. Write a fix, test it, then push to production if we need to. And handling database. How frustrating is a database for people in here? No? Okay. So maybe you guys haven't gotten that far just yet. But the database was such a pain in the ass, especially with WordPress. And going back and forth, and how do you handle it with version control? It's I'll kind of go over what I've found, and it's a popular product, and I'm sure you already know what I'm talking about. So here are the environments that we're working with, right? Local. We would hope that everybody on our team has a local environment and they're working locally, right? But I want a development server, development environment where we can show off our work, right? I need a staging server so that whenever our features that we're developing on the developer environment is good, or maybe a hotfix, I need to push that to staging because I want to make sure that deployment goes well. I don't want to push that to production and then just break, right? Because that would be bad, right? So features and hotfixes on development, push it to staging kind of as like a test run, and then if it's good, push it to production. That's a lot of environments, right? But after you get good at this kind of stuff, it's pretty simple. All right, so version control. Who's not using version control and they work in a team? Let's be honest. Okay, we have that one guy up front. Even if you're working on your own right now, you should be using version control right now. How many times can I say meow? Can I get to 10 before this slide is up? If you don't know that joke, you should watch Super Troopers. Even if you're not on a team right now, you should be using version control and just understand what Git or just version control is in general. There's SVN, that's another form of version control, but just what it is and how it works. Get your questions out of the way. If you don't, here are some resources that I really trust in and things that I go through. It's at the end of the deck too. There's something called a Git handbook. It's gitscm.com. It's a long read, but it's an easy read. And it kind of just goes over terminology. If you don't know where to start just yet, you should read this because it'll get you used to the terminology, visually how things work, different theories, etc. And once you want to get your hands dirty, I would go to Git Immersion. They'll actually run you through a full tutorial. They'll run you into a merge conflict in difficult situations, and it's really hands-on. And they run you through doing the command line, which is not always comfortable for everybody. But I recommend trying the command line at least in a safe environment like Git Immersion, then at least understanding those core concepts, and you can move on to like a GUI that like source tree or et cetera. That's what I would recommend. So when you're working with a team, you have version control, but you have to decide how you're going to use version control. There's got to be a social agreement among your team about how you're going to use it, right? Now, there's all these different theories out there, but there's a couple popular ones that I came across, and I wanted to make sure that we picked the right one. One popular one is called Git Flow. Has anybody heard of this before? Okay. Git Flow is a fairly robust idea as far as handling Git in a team environment. Basically, it's a strict branch idea. You have the master branch, which always exists in your repo, right? And then you have the development branch. Those branches always exist. Always. They're strict. They have to exist. But if you want to create a new feature, you have to branch off the development branch. So these are all the feature branches. If something goes wrong, then you have the hotfix branch, whatever. You merge them all together at some point. When everything's good, you push it to production, and you tag the release. Did that sound like a lot? It might have. Okay, but it's complicated. And while it scales pretty well for teams, that's not something that I wanted to introduce to new people. But it's good in theory. I mean, someone built a tool on top of this just to enforce it. And if I have to use a tool to enforce this idea, then it's probably not, it's just too complicated. The next thing I came across is something called GitHub Flow. And basically, it just has the one master branch that we depend on, right? And you create your features and your hotfixes off this branch. And it's very simple enough. If I need to make a new form, then I'm going to create a new branch. I'm going to write it there, and then when it's good to go, then I can merge it back in. It's flexible. It's simple. I can bring people onto this pretty quickly. It's easy for us to meet on a daily basis and talk about where we're at. And the best thing about it is that it creates conversation. I mean, you could do this with the old flow, but there's something called pull requests in version control. And what it does is, say I'm done building my form feature and I want to merge it in. I create a pull request to say, hey guys, I'm done with this. Can you take a look at it? And so we all look at the code. It's kind of called a code review, and we talk about it on GitHub. And I wanted the pull request feature, part of that because if we started hiring out, then we need, say we just built, we just hired out a contractor, it's not part of our team just yet. I'm not going to automatically merge code into our master branch automatically without me knowing what they're doing first. So I want to have conversation with them first. At the same time, it keeps us all in track with each other about what we're writing. All right, does that make sense? So I liked this. The problem at one point is that we had one site where the site's fairly active, and we're going through different development cycles. So with us, we're not releasing new features often, right? So the old flow that I was just looking at before, it was Git Flow, and that really is good for teams that don't release often. And that's us. We have new features. We're going to release a new feature maybe every few weeks or so, and that's good for us. But it was too complicated. This flow is more for like a continuous development type of product, like GitHub or Chrome. When sometimes you log into Chrome and there's like a new feature, like, oh, I didn't know they changed that, right? They're continuously pumping out new features, and that's what this flow kind of is good for, which doesn't match what we do at all, right? We don't manage applications or things that need to be pushed out too often, et cetera. But it was someday I want to be able to do that, and I want to have that system there, ready and set to go when we all understand that it's simple and flexible enough. And that's there. But when we started developing new features, I now realized that I didn't have just one branch for production, right? So the live site, what if the live site has a problem? We need to fix that problem, but now we're working on new features over here, right? So basically, it's the next flow. It's someone called a Git Lab. There's no real name for it, but the idea is we kind of work under master, and anything that we push to master gets automatically deployed to a development environment. And then we have a staging branch and then a production branch. And anytime we're ready to really push new features, we push it to staging, all right? And then we hit a button that'll deploy to our staging as kind of like a test launch. And if that's good to go, then we do it to production. Does that make sense? So we have a master branch, a staging branch, and a production, and these are all basically linked to the environments that I showed earlier. Does that make sense? I feel like I'm losing everybody. But at least maybe I'm getting you thinking. Okay, yeah?
How do you work in the master?
How am I working it?
Yeah, I mean, you make another branch to work in that.
Yeah, so so what I showed you before, right here, like add navigation, feature X, right? So we're doing the same thing with the master branch there. And so it's just different environments. When our new feature X is ready to go, we'll test it in staging, push it to production.
But you only add things to master when you have the feature complete?
Yeah. So like feature X, right? If I'm done building feature X, I'm going to create a pull request and get people talking about it and make sure this is something we wanted to merge into master. Because master branch is a default branch. The whole idea behind any of this is that anything that goes in the master branch is absolutely deployable. It cannot suck. It cannot break your site, right? It can't. It needs to be tested. We have to have this. We have to talk about it. And so what I do is I set that branch up to automatically deploy to our development environment. And I do it using a few tools that I'll talk about. I don't have staging or production automatically deploying. I only have master doing it because I don't want anything automatically deploying to production without me knowing about it. But I want to be able to work locally, say, okay, this is good, let me send it up, and then everybody can take a look at it. Okay. So we talked about deployments. All right, so Avoiding problems. What would you guys say when you're working with Git is the scariest thing? Merging, right? Like merge conflicts. What if my code collides with your code? That used to scare the crap out of me when I first started this whole thing. But honestly, at some point, you got to be comfortable with it. So like that Git immersion tutorial, it runs you through merge conflicts, and it purposely brings you to a halting stop, a stop, just so you can fix it and learn how to do it. So what I did is I spent time purposely running myself into difficult situations and trying to fix it. What I haven't done with my team just yet is doing the same thing. I would love to at some point, if we gain another person, to run ourselves into some merge conflicts and know how to resolve them. They're not that scary. So just be comfortable with them. What we do on a daily basis, we talk every single day, okay? And so we know where we are in working with the code. I think what really helps us a lot is that we have HipChat, and we all talk in HipChat. You guys familiar with HipChat? Okay, so there's a chat integration for GitHub. Anytime we commit to GitHub, it'll put a nice little message in our HipChat saying, hey, we committed this and this changed, right? Beyond that just looking cool, like everything's at the power of your fingers, it's actually pretty useful. And secondly, just be curious and question everything. If you have a stupid question, ask a stupid question, right? It's difficult to learn processes like this when you already have so much to learn already, and you just want to make money and build good products for people, but then you have this thing in the way that you know you should learn, right? So ask stupid questions and kind of get the learning process out of the way. Deployments. So we talked about deployments a little bit here. So here are your options. You have SFTP, so you can upload things manually. Nope. So how much of a pain would that be if you're making changes to your files and you have to figure out which files change and then upload just those? So who uses SFTP to upload everything? Come on. It's okay. We all did it, right? We all did it at some point. I needed something that would work hand in hand with my version control. It would know what I changed and deploy only that. How nice is that, right? So there's things out there that do it for you. There's one called Capistrano, but the learning curve to that is incredibly high. Let's see here. And Capistrano is basically something you work in the command line, and I wouldn't expect anybody to jump on board with this just yet if they aren't even comfortable with Git, right? But they are tools called Deploy HQ. Has anybody heard of this before? Okay. Yeah, my team, of course. Where it tracks what's happening in your repo. Oh, look, I got Twitter interactions. It tracks what's happening in your repo, and you can automatically deploy to servers when you want to. What's nice about that is that sometimes I want to keep configuration files in my repo, but I don't want it on the server, right? So, because I want to share those configurations with my guys, but I don't want that on the server. So a tool like this will automatically exclude files from the repo that I don't want on the server. It's pretty nice. There's also something called Beanstalk. Beanstalk houses your repo and your deployments, where Deploy HQ just does deployments. So I can use GitHub if I want to, and then just have Deploy HQ work side by side with GitHub. But this will do it both, right? I guess it depends on your preference. These guys do a great job. We've used it before, but it's an option. Anybody heard of Beanstalk before? No? Some other pros to using tools like this is user management. So I can add people to these services, so like Deploy HQ, and I can basically dictate how much power they have. Which is nice. Also, if anybody makes changes to the files on the server, right, and then next time we actually commit to our repo, it'll just overwrite their changes, which is kind of nice. It kind of forces you to move everything through the repo. So I'm really a big fan of using tools like this to handle deployments. It does it in a real responsible way. Their GUI is really nice, and it's pretty cheap. It's like $10 a month for how many projects? I don't even know. So very, pretty valuable service. Next thing I was going to talk about is the database handling. So what are some of the things you guys do now to handle a database moving from like local to live or production? What's that? Yeah. Okay. Well, you're up here. Do you guys handle databases a lot? Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Okay. So at first, the first thing you learn is you go into basically this product is what we're using. Basically, you do SQL dumps. You go to phpMyAdmin, dump it, import it into your local, right? If you're using MAMP, WAMP, example, whatever, and then you have to run the search replace scripts that WordPress endorses, right? Kind of a pain. But what if you need to? What if you want to push those changes back up? You know, there's so many questions about, and then how do you share those database changes with somebody else that's also working with your team? How do you do that stuff, right? Because it's completely separate from your files. So there's a product called WP Migrate DB Pro, and just drag it up here really quick. And it's fairly simple. All it really does is it syncs your database. So if there's, on the production, if our clients have made new changes, they've added menus or widgets, or they changed their settings around, I can pull the entire database down and it'll just replace mine. It doesn't sync, it just replaces, right? So how do we handle that in a distributed environment? Well, we're always deploying work to our development server because we have to show off work to our clients, right? So locally, what we do is we just test database changes on our local environment. So if I want to try out a new menu, just make sure that menu interacts correctly. If there's a new widget, I want to make sure that widget interacts correctly, right? Once I like the way it works, then I'll go to the development server, make the change, and then just pull down the database just again. That way, when I make the change on the server, now all my guys have access to my change, right? And I want that change to stay at that point. Does that make sense? So I'm never really pushing back to the server, because if one of my guys made a change on that server already and I push back to them, now I'm going to overwrite his stuff. So test your database changes just locally on your own computer. When you like what you got, then put it on the remote server, which is like your development, staging, whatever, and then pull it back down. That's my opinion on that. I was kind of hoping somebody would throw their 2 cents in.
Those 2 separate steps,
Mm-hmm.
the Git pull and then also the sync from the database.
Mm-hmm.
Each time.
Yeah. So say our, the team has made like new changes to the repo. I can git pull. That's a very quick command. But I do need to go into the WordPress backend and then do a pull in the database separately. That is what we do now. What's nice is the guy that develops this thing actually made an integration with WP CLI. WP CLI is just a command line for WordPress. And depending on what you run locally, I use VVV, which is like varying vagrants. And you can have a script that basically just does it all at once. But that's a steep learning curve too. So there is a way to git pull down the database, and go. There is a way to do that, but you kind of have to write it yourself. But some people they made that integration easier, if you will. But it's not as cumbersome as you think. Just to do git pull, run into the backend really quick, and then pull. It's pretty quick.
It brings just specific tables or the whole database?
It could do both. So you can do the whole database, or you can pick specific tables. So some issues with that is like the post table. The post table holds, like, of course, all your posts, but also holds menu items.
How does it handle the serialization?
I'm sorry?
Because let's say you have a development environment under one different URL than the production.
Mm-hmm.
How does it handle the
Yeah. It runs a search replace command as it pulls down.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's and you can tell it what URL to replace, but it usually just kind of picks it up automatically and you just run with it. It's like $160, but it's so worth it. Unfortunately, it's a good solution, but it's not the best solution. What would be an awesome solution is if I make a change locally, right? For some reason, I can version control that in my repo, and then my team can see that change and then implement that change on their own without even pushing it to a development server. Some ideas for that are something called change scripts, where, say, I make a new WordPress menu, right? Well, that's a new write to the database, and there's a way to do that in PHP. So what it would do is it would log a PHP written line to input that menu into the database. It would save it to a file. I can now version control that file, share it to somebody else, and then they can run it too. So that's probably like really, I could run with that idea forever. But that's some, I think Mark Jakewith might, there was rumor that he might be developing a solution for that at some point. So that's it. That's how I handle a database. And honestly, like, so when it comes down to it, the system needs to be simple. I need to be able to onboard people pretty quickly. They have to understand Git and be comfortable with making mistakes. And that's really it. That's what I have found to be pretty successful. We handle some pretty large projects, and over several projects now, it's worked pretty well, and I'm not worried about it scaling just yet. And of course, there might be some things that we change here and there. There's one idea that I'm messing around with in my mind right now, but yeah, that's it really. So. Do you guys have questions or anything and there's no stupid questions here.
A use case would be if you had a client job you did, and then 6 months later you get that phone call and they want to do a change. Do you have the ability to create that environment as it was 6 months ago? Or,
That's a good question. So
use containers or something like Docker?
we can keep the environment running, but it's not. We usually, say 6 months down the line, maybe we destroy the development environment for some reason, but we always still have the staging environment. The reason why we always have the staging environment is because we have to upgrade. With our company, we take care of their sites for them. We try to do everything, right? So we have to test plugins and theme upgrades, so we always do that in staging. It's not hard for us to spin up a new development server based on the production code whenever we want to. And we do that just right on the repo. We have a copy of our code on the repo and the database. So we'll spin up a server with that code, and then we can pull the database across from production to the new development environment with that plugin I was just talking about. And now we have our new development environment. We can do our new development phase. When it's ready to go, we'll push the staging. That staging run went well, and then we'll push to production. That's kind of how we run it right now. Yes? Mm-hmm.
So we have multiple people touching multiple projects. We had smaller projects that were small enough that we really never had more than one person working on that project at a time.
Yeah.
But then we had bigger projects where we never had less than 3 people touching the project at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
On the bigger projects, everything that you're laying out here, we found extremely helpful, simplified, streamlined things. But for the smaller projects, it usually ended up costing more time.
Yeah.
Do some of these things. So what's your opinion on, I guess just for smaller projects, keeping things, not doing these for simplicity's sake, or doing these anyways for consistency's sake?
Yeah. Well, what did you guys do?
We ended up
Not doing it.
But I can totally see how you would want to keep your process consistent.
Yeah.
So that way everyone's in the same mindset. You don't have to think about, okay, how do we do it for smaller? I didn't know if you guys had any smaller projects where you kind of threw half this stuff out the window so you could finish the project.
Well, my opinion is to stay consistent. I would, consistency always sounds like it's the best answer. But the reason why I say that is because we have that pull request system, and there's usually one person or a team of people that would approve the code. You have 5 or 6 guys on the team. All of those guys should not have the ability to merge into master, in my opinion. There should be 1 or 2 guys, and they approve that code. They have you guys have conversations about that code, and just to maintain that practice, even on smaller projects, is going to allow things to not get out of hand. That Git flow that I showed you is simple, but it's very easy to get out of hand. So you have to have kind of controls in there to make sure that things are consistent, and I love being consistent. I have a routine every day. I get up at the same time every day. I go to the gym same time every day, so I'm going to love consistency. I think most developers would prefer that. But I understand, it's like, God, this takes so long. And that's why cowboy coding is such a prevalent thing. Because why do all that BS when you can just go straight to the code? You know? Yep.
I have a question about the database.
Mm-hmm.
So if the client updated their website and added new images,
Mm-hmm.
so you would use WP Migrate DB Pro to put it on the
Yeah,
development?
that's a great question. I should have
If
talked.
you want your coworkers to work on that database as well,
Uh-huh.
like how do you coordinate that?
So how to handle uploads and how that works with the database. One, I don't keep uploads in the repo to start with. I proxy them to the server. So on the development server, I know that all the uploads exist there. So on my local computer, I'm saying, hey, all these uploads actually exist up here in this remote server. Just map up there. It's called proxy by uploads. If you work locally and you don't want to keep uploads in your computer, there's a great plugin called proxy by uploads or something like that. And uploads are heavy. You don't want that in your repo. You don't put images in your repo. It's nice to have that plugin just to proxy them up to where they exist. I don't really handle it any differently than what I explained as far as if we have to add an image like the media gallery or featured thumbnail or post thumbnail, whatever, I'll test it out locally first. If the image works, then I'll upload it to my development server so it exists there in the database and everything, and then I'll just pull the database back down. Now that image exists on the development server, it's recorded in the database, my local computer can read that just fine and interact the same exact way now. Because I'm proxying that upload to say, hey, if the photo doesn't exist on your local computer, then just use the one that's existing on your development server instead of having it locally. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, and what if like somebody else who works for you in
Mhm.
the company wants to see what you did? So they basically download that database.
Yeah,
of
yep.
That server,
Yep.
development server.
Mm-hmm. So I'll go make the change to the development server, right? And I'll upload the image up there. And if they want it, and they want to work with it locally, they have to use that plugin to pull it down too, so they have it.
And if you want to update the live site, you just push it with the same plugin, right? The database.
That's a trickier situation, and probably a much longer talk or separate talk as far as how you push to production. But yes, essentially. I deploy the files in this very same way to development, to staging, and then to production. A problem that we have come across is, well, what if it's like a blog, it's a real active blog, they're making new posts all the time, right? Well, you have to sync those changes with now the changes that you're making on your development server. What if you added new menus, new widgets, whatever? You can't sync databases, right? So how do you handle that situation? What we've been doing now is we'll make sure that production and staging match, right? Right before I want to push a new feature, and I'm basically manually recording all the database changes that I made on the development server so I can manually put them on staging and then launch the thing. I could probably talk more about that. That might sound confusing, but that is a problem that I have now that I haven't figured out just yet, and I've spent hours trying to figure it out, and I haven't. Yes?
What if you want to just play with some plugin or theme? Do you try the development side? Do you try to download and install something? Do you have a sandbox environment also?
If you just want to play with a plugin,
Yeah, if you want to have a new plugin and you want to see if it works with your current website, how do you test it? Do you test on you download the production and then you try in a different environment?
no, I would not put it on production first. You never put anything on production without it.
Download the production and then try in the sandbox environment?
Well, you have your development and your staging environment first, right? So if you guys are in active development, then I would just put it on your local machine if you have a copy there on your computer and test it there. For us, we're not always in active development. So sometimes we don't always have a development server going. We just have staging and production, right? At that point, I think it's completely okay just to go to the staging server, install the plugin there, make sure it works. If it does, push it live. That's how we run plugin updates and theme updates right now. When we have clients that aren't actively in development, we have to make sure that any plugin updates or theme updates work good before you put it on the production server. If you're updating plugins live on a production site and themes, shame on you. You should not do that. Make sure you have a staging environment and you test those things there, make sure they work, and then push it live. If your site breaks because of that, it's your fault, not the person who made the plugin's fault. Sorry, that was a mini rant. But that's what I would do. Don't do it on production. You should always have a staging environment at least test it there, and then if it works good, push it live. Yes?
To kind of piggyback on that, are there times when you don't have both a dev server and a staging server?
No.
No, you always have both?
Always have a staging server. Always.
So the dev is for internal, staging is for the client to look at, and the production is obviously for.
Dev is for the client to look at. Staging is really to test new code or new features or a hot fix, like a bug, like there's a bug. If it works good there, then we'll push it to production. But on development, we're developing new features there, and we want to show off our work and tell them what we're doing. When that new feature is ready on development, we'll push it to staging to make sure that launch went okay. It's like a pseudo launch, and they'll push it to production to make sure, because then we'll know that it works then.
Okay. So staging is more closely connected with the live site.
Yeah.
And dev is more closely connected with WordPress.
New features, testing out,
But to that, like, so if there's a quick thing, like the client either needs something small to be changed, or if something broke, because Twitter changed their API like they do every other day.
right.
You wouldn't do that you wouldn't walk that all the way through, you just do it on staging and then push it to production?
I think it depends where we are with that client. Like if we are in an active development phase, like they want something new and we're building it for them, then yeah, we'll probably do it on the development server and test it out there first, roll it to staging, and then to production. If we're not, it doesn't hurt, at least the way we work with each other, it doesn't hurt to just test that new Twitter API change on the staging site first. If it works okay, roll it to production.
You can buy test dev all to do it.
Right.
Talking like a client that you haven't talked to in like 5 months,
Mhm.
and they come to you with a quick thing that is broken because they, I don't know, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay.
Opinions about that though is that for our clients, we most of our clients we take care of their websites too, right? So we're actively talking to them every week. We're updating their plugins on a monthly basis. We're recording all that stuff. If it's been 6 months since we've talked to them, chances are we need to reassess each other. What have you done to that site before, in the last 6 months that we haven't known about just yet? That there might be like an onboarding, on-ramp cost that we need to, this might be a completely different site than it was 6 months ago, So, but for most of our clients, we're continuous. We have a good relationship with them. We know the code base. It's not an issue. That's my opinion as far as that. Yes?
Do you keep WordPress core files in the repo?
I used to. So the reason I used to is because if WordPress upgrades, then I want to be able to test that upgrade before I push it to production, right? And a good reason for that is jQuery was just updated in 4.0, and it broke something of ours, right? It broke something, but we have to test it first. I've now recently subscribed to WP-CLI, which is it's a command line tool for WordPress, and I can install WordPress with a simple WordPress command. So now that I've gotten used to that, I keep core out of our repo now because I can pull the repo down, quickly install WordPress. I can quickly test new upgrades if I wanted to, or different versions if I wanted to. And with our flow, I can push that to staging, push it to production real fast. So no, not anymore. But there are very good reasons for it, and WordPress is not that big, and I don't think it's a big deal to put it in your repo if you don't want, if you want to. That's a good question, though. Yep.
Or that's just about to ask the same question.
Oh, okay.
So then, what does your repo start with? When you open up the repo, at the repo's root, is
Mhm.
it WP content?
Yes.
Or
Yeah.
it's just WP content?
Just WP content. We have a few configuration files that sometimes we want to keep in the root. Like sometimes we have special HT access things depending on the client. It depends. Yeah, interesting. It depends on the clients. Like sometimes we have certain HT access things that we want to keep track of and we don't want to lose it. So yeah, if you look at the root of most of our repos, it's just WP content folder most of the time, and maybe a few configuration files that's just part of our flow. Yeah, we keep track of the plugins folder, all the themes, never any caching. Like if you use W3 Total Cache, it has like its own folder and files. We could keep that all out. We don't need that stuff. What's good to know is that if GitHub actually has its own version of a WordPress gitignore file, like they have their own starter gitignore file for WordPress. So if you want a good starter file, this is GitHub's idea of what you should start with for WordPress. So you can check that out, WordPress.gitignore file. Yep.
What about keeping things like various maybe tools or
Mhm.
other dependencies you use, like maybe use a Redux framework or something like that for your options?
Absolutely, yeah.
Do you keep that in there, or do you do something to include the latest version, or how do you usually?
Yeah, well, if you're using the Redux theme framework, which I have used it before, absolutely put that in, because you just put that in your. They have a plugin version, and then you can put that in your theme, right? And just include it in your theme. So depending, if you're including it with your theme, absolutely, and we keep track of all plugins anyways, so no question. If they have like a submodule for it, I haven't gotten on the whole submodule train just yet, but absolutely, it's going in the repo if it affects our site, plugin-wise or functionality-wise.
Okay.
Good questions, though. Yeah, sure.
How do you handle config files, like local config? Is it going to be different from the WP config on a server?
So there are configuration files that I want to be in our repo because I want to be able to share that with my team, right? Because that's kind of what we work with locally. Examples might be grunt files or grunt configuration files. A couple others, off the top of my head. But the idea is I want to share those with people I work with so they can have those locally. But when I deploy those things, like using like deploy HQ, I tell deploy HQ to ignore those things, which is nice. Some people, if you have like WP Engine or SiteGround, they have like Git push deployments, where you basically have a Git repo on your server, and you push to the Git repo on your server, which doesn't make sense to me. Because if there's configuration files that I don't want there, then that's a whole other topic too, I guess. But I want a little bit more control. I want to be able to add users. I want to have like a good interface that I can bring people onto my team and they can do deployments if they want to. It just gives me a little bit more control, and it's only $10 a month. I just didn't like the Git deployment type stuff. Yeah, good question though. Yeah, sure. No, I don't. I'll talk all day on this.
You mentioned Deploy HQ and Beanstalk. Do you have a preference?
Deploy HQ because I want to use GitHub. What's that? I'm sorry?
But your client side's on GitHub.
No, we pay a lot of money to keep everything private. So yeah, we keep everything private. Beanstalk, it's your repo and deployments. They do a great job though.
It seems like it'd be nice to have it all in one place, but
We like the markdown type stuff at GitHub. We like to be able to like do commits where it says fixes number 47 if there's an issue and it closes that issue. We haven't fully integrated that idea yet, but we want to move a little bit more towards Git issues on some things. So we just love GitHub too. So Beanstalk is great though. There's an agency that we work with in Atlanta that uses all Beanstalk. So when we work with them, we use their Beanstalk account, and it's great. They encourage the whole pull request conversation thing that I was talking about. I think it's just whatever you prefer. It's a preference. Cool. I'm glad I got so many questions.